Hey y'all, thanks for joining us today. You're listening to Society Bites Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Richard Himmer.
And I'm CHERI HIMMER, and this is Authentically You, social interaction for the mind and soul.
For the next 25 minutes, we're going to be talking about healing and growth from the inside out. Remember, you are 100% responsible for your happiness, joy, and well-being. So, CHERI, are you present?
I am here. So, okay, I want you to dissect some words. We use a lot of words in this podcast. You use a lot in your practice. Can you explain all the words that you use, like acceptance, resistance, civility with boundaries? And what does authentically you even mean? So we try to do that every segment to talk about what it means to be authentic. But you use them in a specific way and even have your own set of definitions.
Yeah, so you understand how I do this. For many, many years, as I've been in school, and I've got way too many years of schooling, and I've sat in church, I've sat in meetings, and I hear people who are leaders or instructors or teachers use words in the English language that they have a meaning behind that, and it's clearly not what I understand, or it may not be what the audience is understanding. To me, that's a distortion.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense to me.
Like a semantics distortion.
For example, the word love. That's one's always bothered me. I was supposed to tell this story, but this is what happened. And I think I maybe have. I had this couple that I've been coaching for a couple of years. They lived out of state, and they started in the state, and then they moved. So this went over years, and then they kind of went dark, but meaning that we weren't talking anymore because things were going well. They were on the verge of divorce when I first met them. Things seemed to have gotten a lot better, but they had some basic inherent philosophical differences that seemed to be at the heart of what their challenges were. And then they called me up one day and said, "We're going to be in your area. Could we visit you?" And I thought, interesting. But they did show up, and they came in the office, and they did their small talk for a moment, and then he took over and said, Dr. Himmer, we want you to know we're very appreciative of all the work you've done. You've changed our lives, that type of stuff. And I want you to know that I love my wife, but I'm going to get a divorce. And she said, yes, I love my husband, but we're getting a divorce. And I've already been down the road with them enough that I didn't go into this one. But I've been down this road before with others. And here's what they really said. To me, there's two definitions of love. There's an unconditional version and there's a conditional version. They were explaining the unconditional version, which means to see good in others. So the husband said, I can see good in my wife. And the wife said, I can see good in my husband. But that's not a basis for long-lasting relationships. I can see good in whoever. I can see good in politicians. I can. I know some people can't. I believe that you can see good in them. I can see good in some of the worst villains the earth has ever known. I have the ability to see good in them. I may choose not to, but I have the ability. The second definition is really the point of it. The second definition, which is conditional, is mutual trust and respect or emotional intimacy. That's not what they had. Because he doesn't trust her. She doesn't trust him. He doesn't respect her. She doesn't respect him. And that's at the heart of every divorce I've ever been involved in or witnessed. And I've seen involved in not just as a coach, but everybody knows people who've been divorced. Ask yourself, did those two have mutual trust and respect? Now take one step earlier. Did either one of them have self-trust and respect? How many divorces have you seen is because one or the two of them or both of them had addictions? And I don't mean the typical alcohol.
Or exogenous addictions.
An endogenous one, controlling, pornography, sex, manipulating, sarcasm, holding grudges, codependency. Those are still addictions, and the brain can't tell the difference between a codependent way of manifesting it and by the way, when we engage in these false narratives, when we engage in cognitive distortions, that's a way to medicate the daughter. Mom, I hate you. It's how she addressed the pain she was feeling now because she couldn't give a voice to the fact she didn't want to scoop poop right now. But once the mother connected with her and they talked it out, there was no out of this animosity. I hate you, Mom, or you're the worst mom in the world. It was, yeah, Mom, that's a great idea. This is what I'm getting at. words have definitions. They have to have specific meanings. I'm not saying my meanings are right. I'm suggesting they work within the process of healing. And love, if you applied love, and I say to you, CHERI, I love you. I love you in the full meaning of the word. I'm basically saying to you that I have trust and I have respect for you because I trust and I respect myself. Now, I did put a third meaning behind it, but it's more of an explanation. Love, according to the researchers that we found in utero, who did a lot of research on the impact of trauma on early childhood and in utero infants or fetuses, they argue understanding another person empathetically is love, meaning feeling love is being understood. That is powerful. Did that wife understand that husband before they got married through his eyes? Okay, so I wasn't going to cover here, but this is a perfect segue into empath and an empathetic person. They are two different things. I would argue probably 20 to 30% of the people who come in my office characterize themselves, identify
as being empathetic.
Empaths.
Oh, they even say
they use the word empath.
They say, I'm an empath.
Yeah.
And what are they meaning when they say that?
I can sense the emotions of people around. I can predict what they're feeling.
Okay.
I can predict what they're going to say and do next.
And they feel the big emotions that are around them.
Big emotions.
Because that happens to me in the classroom with students too.
So they're empathic?
Well, that they're highly sensitive people, and that they're responding overly. That's like an over response to maybe emotions that might be in the classroom and in an environment like a classroom.
So in my most recent version of my Models and Definitions book, I put this section in there because of how many people I deal with. One of my best friends is an empath. It's a gentleman. Mm-hmm. He's an empath. And he says, yeah, Rich, I can walk in a room and, man, I can feel everything. I feel everybody. And that's not bad. He didn't do anything to get there.
No.
You either are or you are not.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a personality trait.
To me, it almost seems like we talk about sensory issues or disorders. I don't know that they're a disorder. It's a different way of processing the world with their sensory. And the feelings of others would be like your sixth sense.
Yeah. And I would argue it's anything but a disorder. It's a gift. It can be used as a tool.
It can be, but I'm sure it's a challenge for them because what do you do with everybody else's emotions as you're feeling them?
Well, what I'm suggesting is that people who are identified as empaths, at least the ones that come into my office, don't know what to do with it and They don't know the definition. So what they think are being empathetic, they are really not.
They're being an empath.
They're being Now, let me reframe that. Instead of being empathic, the true meaning of the word, they're being sympathetic, codependent,
right?
And they're in a cognitive distortion. They're mind reading. They're projecting.
Yeah.
And they're taking onto themselves in a total position of resistance.
So what is your definition of empath?
So it is empath is a dysfunctional collection of behaviors. An empath takes on other people's emotions as their own. They're not authentic. They lose their authenticity.
Well, I think it's confusing when they are a little bit more sensitive, that it is a skill set they have to get for survival.
Right. Well, they perceive that. So what happens is when they take upon other people's emotions as their own, they're taking into themselves energy that's not theirs, and that's not acceptance. That's resistance.
Yeah.
So we'll cover that. Hopefully we have time to get to those. It is a loss of authenticity and identity. An empath can become overwhelmed in public, sense the vibes in a room, perceive they know where people are coming from, and that's been done to me ad nauseum. And this is that very sentence right there, which is not my word. I took that right off the research, is where I got the idea that relating is such a harmful social disease. It's a communication blind spot, because people have been trying to tell me they know what I'm going through since I was 10. That's my cognitive memory. I'm sure it was before, but I have no memory of that. They don't. You don't. No empath knows what you're going through. They may sense your feelings, But those feelings are all biased by their own experiences.
And so the problem with it is when they're sensing something, they're taking in more stimuli emotionally than maybe other people do, but then they misinterpret.
Because it's biased interpretation. It's very selective, and that's a cognitive distortion, by the way.
So they're dealing with a lot of cognitive distortions.
It can be overwhelming, and that's why. But they don't have the filter system. They haven't learned the skill set. This is the emotional intelligence aspect on how to process the emotions in the room. So they sense the vibes in a room. Said they perceive, they think, they know where people are coming from. Tragic or violent events incapacitate them. They have an over-the-top affection for animals, pets, or babies. They feel people's illnesses, are overwhelmed in intimate relationships. That one I find interesting. I watched that happen because they run from it. They sabotage them. And cannot see someone in pain without wanting to help. Think of some stories with, like my sister when she saw the horse. As such, empaths collect energy and project their immaculate perception on the world.
Okay, you maybe need to tell the story about the horse. We're driving along a highway, right?
We're driving along a highway. We just came from being up in the mountains at a shooting range.
Right.
We're going to dinner to grab a bite to eat. We hadn't eaten in hours.
And we're caravanning multiple cars.
Right. And all of a sudden, my sister goes absent without leave.
And she's driving a car behind us.
Yeah. She goes dark. We don't know where she is. They show up 40 minutes later while we're finishing our food. And she came with my son, who was pretty fit to be tied about this time. She saw a horse that she perceived was in distress. And this is after she saw the dog that she perceived was in distress. The dog was just running around. He was 100 yards from his owner. She couldn't see the owner because he was in a gully. And she was trying to rescue this dog that was collared. There's nothing about it, just that she perceived.
This was out in a very rural area.
Right. And
so sometimes dogs have a little bit more territory in rural areas.
We saw the owner. She just didn't. And so she went to rescue the dog when she realized that the owner just called the dog. She
slams on the brakes.
Yeah. And the same thing with the horse. She goes, think this horse is in distress. It wasn't. Once they went and investigated, they drove 2 or 3 miles and it bugged her. So she had to turn around and drive back. And that's what cost them so much time.
So 40 minutes off her schedule because she perceived 2 animals needed her.
Yeah. And what I'm suggesting is that it's not bad that she has those feelings. That's not the issue. It's regulating them and balancing them.
But it's over heightened sensory towards rescuing animals.
So we said, has such empaths collect energy and project their immaculate perception on the world. This biases the energy and increases the pain and suffering of all involved. Notice the impact it had upon everyone in our collective, shooting experience that day. Collecting and projecting is self-medication. That's what an empath is.
And then there'll be random times where that will be affirmed by experiences where, you're actually able to go and rescue.
Right.
And where the real rescue.
Sometimes they do get the information right.
So that feedback loop, I'm a rescuer of animals, is going to get affirmed and reinforced.
That's well said.
And so therefore that empathetic pathway is just getting deeper.
And that's enjoyment performance theory.
That's true.
When you enjoy doing something, you do more of it. And she is getting feedback on occasion, but she biases the feedback. She's not biasing the fact that she missed this completely twice within 20 minutes. So she's very selective, and that's a cognitive distortion as well.
Yeah.
Because you're not taking in the entirety of, and this is also where we explain the scientist. The biased scientist is a cognitive distorter. He makes his living on distorting the stories around you by selectively taking information and adhering to that information at the expense of the totality of the picture.
Okay, so Dr. Himmer, you're speaking the language, and this segment's all about breaking down the language and defining. Now that we just talked about what an empath was, could you go to what an empathetic person is so we can contrast it? How is that different if I feel empathy, but I'm not an empath?
So an empathetic person understands the feelings and thoughts of another person, emotional and physical, and I'd argue spiritual as well, without taking their energy into themselves. So rest on that. That means I can walk in a room. I can sense all the emotions. And here's where Dr. Siegel has really helped me understand. And I can name the feelings